as I was sharing, there's live audience here and there's audience on screen. So we're going to give it our best shot. With goodwill, I think we'll have a wonderful evening together. So I am to center myself. I need to say a prayer. I need to gather in some forces. So this is by Anne Ellerton and is included in the Children's Calendar of the Soul. And for those who may be watching this later, if you are not familiar with the Calendar of the Soul, they are 52 weekly verses that were created by Rudolf Steiner as a meditative path through the cycle of the year. And not only verses, but they included new images of the sun zodiac, as well as new images for the moon zodiac and feast and festival days, so that there was a really engaged and rich experience of the year as a living being. And the Calendar of the Soul begins every year on Easter. So I'm going to begin with this prayer by Anne Ellerton, the prayer of Saint Bride of Iona. Christ, King of the elements, hear me. Earth, bear me. Water, quicken me. Air, lift me. Fire, cleanse me. Christ, King of the elements, hear me. I will bear the burden of earth with thee. I will lift my heart to the air to thee. I will cleanse my desire for love of thee. I will offer my life renewed to thee. Christ, King of the elements, hear me. Water, fire, air, and earth, weave within my heart this day a cradle for thy birth. I'd also like to take a moment to dedicate this talk to our friend Tim, who was a valiant Archangel Michael for our pageant with Isabel Wyatt's story, Snowflake and the Dragon, which we did earlier this afternoon. And then also to share that because we are, some of us here physically, and some of us in this physical space, myself included for the first time, and some of us are here virtually, it's really important to think about the being of Archangel Michael and the description of this being as the protector and keeper of cosmic intelligence. And to ask the question, how does it make its way to us as physical human beings on the earth? And we are in really diverse environments now. We're dealing with the internet. We're dealing with being in person. We're dealing with being in person, but staying apart from one another. We join our voices together. We are having all of these varied experiences. So I'd like to begin by considering what it is to be human in the elements of time and space. And so to begin with space, I think what we can each do in this moment is consider what are the directions from the point where I am right now? Which way is north? Burley, maybe you could help. That way is north. And everybody just think of north right now. Now, we even also hear a call to consider the directions in the Foundation Stone meditation from Rudolf Steiner. In the first 3 panels, the directions are repeated 3 times. So where I am, north is to my right, which means south is to my left. I'm facing west, and east is behind me. So if everybody in your space could get a sense of north and south and east and west, to just give us a sense of the space that we're in, and to think of the horizon. And what we experience in the cycle of the year is that the sun will rise in the east and set in the west. That happens each day. But as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, it doesn't stay in the same spot. So day by day, it will move degree by degree. So we've just come through the fall equinox, which is the point of balance where day and night are of equal length. And so just for the sake of making my point, we'll imagine that when the sun sets at the fall equinox, it's setting due west. It's exactly west. And then the very next day, when the sun sets, it will be 1 degree south of west. The next day, 2 degrees south of west. And it keeps going along the horizon, moving further and further south until we get to the winter solstice. And the sun is setting as far south as it can get. And then there seems to be a pause. And after that pause, the sun will then begin to return to the north, degree by degree by degree, until we get to the spring equinox. And now we can imagine that the sun is rising due east. And then from that moment, each day the sun will rise slightly further north, degree by degree, until it gets as far north as possible. And then we have summer solstice, a pause, and then the sun begins to move back south along the horizon. So we have this experience in space of the relationship between the earth and the sun that gradually changes over time. And then to find within the boundaries of that space a sense of rhythm. Human beings have established ways to honor and celebrate these turning points that happen in the cycle of the year. And so we can look in any particular culture. I'm going to look through the Christian culture and find the festival days that belong to these moments when the sun is either due east or due west, or as far north or as far south as it can be in its relationship with the earth. So if we were to begin with the sun as far south as it can get when it's rising, that comes at winter solstice. And after that moment, 3 days later, we have the celebration of Christmas, the birth of the Christ child. And then the sun begins to move north, and we come to the spring equinox when the sun sets due east and begins to rise up. We wait for a witness of the return of the sun. That's the moon. When the moon becomes full, it will be opposite the sun. It will be going south now while the sun is coming north. And that is the moon that helps us say, now the sun has returned. We will celebrate the festival of Easter. So this is coming in the spring after the sun is returning, rising due east and going north. And then when we get to the northernmost point, when the sun comes to its summer solstice point for us in the northern hemisphere, and it's as far north as it can be, 3 days later, we have the feast of St. John. So John is the witness. And then to complete this cycle of the year, when we come back round to autumn equinox, which just happened on the 22nd of September, so just a few days ago, then within a week of that equinox, we have the feast of the Archangel Michael, which is what is causing our gathering together today. So we have these mighty celebrations that mark these points in the cycle of the year that are aligned to the earth relationship to the sun. And if you look more deeply into it, you'll see that 2 of these festivals happen when the sun is below the celestial equator, which is what it's doing at equinox. It's crossing over the celestial equator. In the spring, it's crossing it going north. You have greater daylight in the northern hemisphere. And in the fall, it's crossing it going south, so we have greater darkness. And then we have 2 festivals when the sun is below the celestial equator, when we're in the northern hemisphere. That's Michaelmas and Christmas. So these happen in the darkening time of the year. And they have to do with the birth of inner light and the strength of will in the human being to shine that light into outer darkness. Then the 2 other festivals occur when the sun has returned north of the celestial equator. So Easter happens when the sun is above the celestial equator, and St. John's occurs when the sun is highest above the celestial equator. So just to give a sense of the rhythm and the relationship spatially, so that we can have this sense of trying to find our way to the meaning behind these festivals in space and in time, and particularly in their relationship to the being of Michael as the keeper of cosmic intelligence. Because what can happen at these moments when there is a certain harmony in relationship between earth and sun, or earth and moon and sun, it's as though, I'll use the word portal, it's as though a portal opens and there's an exchange that can take place between the human being and the celestial spiritual world. It's not that this isn't always going on, but there are rhythmic moments in time that we can experience in space on the earth when this occurs. And this is where the sacred festivals happen. So just to give us a sense of how we are aligning in that experience for the cycle of the year. And then I also would like to go a little bit further and talk about the picture that's happening in the stars overhead every year from one year to the next. Now the Earth is making three motions. We rotate on our axis, which gives us day and night. We orbit the sun, which gives us the experience of the seasons. And we're also slightly wobbling on our axis. But that wobble takes about 25,920 years. It's not something we witness in the course of one life between birth and death. Nonetheless, it's been known since ancient ages, and this is what causes the precession, but will also cause our relationship to the stars to slightly drift over time. So we live in a time when the apparent axis of the Earth is pointing toward the North Star Polaris. Now, this was not always the North Star. During the time of the ancient Egyptian culture, the North Star was Thuban, in the tail of the dragon. Now, the North Star is Polaris. This is the star in the tail of the little bear. In several thousand years, the North Star will be in the region of Cepheus, the king. So just looking at that gives us a story about human culture when the North Star is in the possession of the dragon, and then the possession of the bear, and then the possession of the king. And this is caused by the wobble of the Earth on its axis, which scientists will say is due to the force that's put upon it by the orbiting moon and the sun and the other planets, that the Earth is not just static in its relationship, it has this movement. Now, each year in the spring, when the sun comes across the celestial equator and starts to head north, we have, when you look into the evening sky, you'll start to see the constellation of the Hydra pick its head up over the horizon. So the Hydra is just below the region of the constellation Virgo, so kind of the high constellations of the summer. So the Hydra lifts up its head, and there's this really interesting, I want to say symmetry, but I don't know if that's the right word. It's kind of poetic, although there's a challenge in it, that every year in the spring, we come to the equinox, and then a few days later on the 25th of March, we have the feast of the Archangel Gabriel, who announces the birth of the Christ child to Mary. So his feast is on March 24th. The Feast of the Annunciation happens on March 25th. And then on March 26th, the star Alphard, which is at the throat of the Hydra, comes to its highest place. So there's this interesting picture starting to show up in the spring. And we're at the opposite time of year, but just to set that up, that we've got the communicator, Archangel Gabriel, bringing this annunciation to Mary. Should she choose to accept this task, she will give birth to the Christ child, then the Feast of the Annunciation, and then right at that time, the star at the throat of the Hydra, the serpent, comes highest up. So we have this relationship between the feminine accepting a task and this arousing the serpent. When we get to the autumn equinox time, which is where we are now, and depending on the latitude that you are on the Earth, what you will see now is that the constellation region of Virgo is setting with the sun. And so the Hydra is snaking along beneath Virgo. And what we see around the time of the autumn equinox is that the tail of the Hydra starts to go over the horizon and it begins to set. So one could imagine that between the time of the spring equinox and the autumn equinox, when the sun is going furthest north and the Hydra has come up and we're breathing out with the Earth into this summer dream, that this serpent is kind of wrapping itself around whatever we've left behind on the Earth. And that then when we begin on the in-breath that happens at summer solstice and come to autumn equinox, and now we begin to feel Earth again in a way that isn't quite as dreamy as in the summer months, we can begin to encounter this serpent. And so it's right here that you have the feast of Michael, who is described as the one who overpowers that serpent. So we had earlier today, Burley shared with us an image that comes from chapter 12 in the book of Revelation, a description of a beautiful woman clothed with the sun, a crown of stars upon her head, the moon beneath her feet, and she's laboring to give birth. And as she's laboring to give birth, a description also appears of a dragon there, waiting to devour the child as soon as it's born. So this is a picture that we can see in the sky with the stars, where we have Virgo as potentially this maiden, this virgin, this divine feminine. And beneath her is this serpent. And when we're at the spring equinox and the sun has crossed over the celestial equator and the moon becomes full, which is the indication in the Christian tradition that it's now time to look for the Easter mystery to happen on the earth, that moon will be in the region of Virgo. So you could say this is the moon that is beneath the feet of the Virgin. So in the spring, the sun is coming up above the celestial equator. The moon comes full below the celestial equator. It's below the Virgin. And if you look at a star map and you imagine Virgo, which she seems to be reclining on the ecliptic, which is the path that all the planets follow, they seem to be following around the earth through the zodiac. If the moon is there in that region and you stand her up, then you see the constellation Corona Borealis, the starry crown, will appear on her head. Now this picture is not there in the sky unless the human being imagines it. You can see Virgo, you can see the Hydra, you can see the starry crown, but you have to activate your own imagination to draw that picture out of the stars. And by imagination, I don't just mean make believe, but that imaginative cognition is the kind of cognition required of us when we're dealing with something beyond time and space. When we have to look beyond the sense perceptible world, we have the intellect and intellectual cognition to help us make our way through the sense perceptible world, but we need imaginative cognition when we move beyond this realm. So when we're reaching into starry realms, I would argue that we are moving beyond the time-space element. And so we can perhaps start to live into some of these mighty images that were handed down to us through the ages, this being one of them. And so, but what's not to be overlooked is that if you live into this imagination of the feminine standing on the moon with the crown of stars on her head, the next part of the picture, the dragon becomes active. He's stirred by this activity. And so this is where the Michaelic will is required to give us the capacity to deal with uprightness and freedom as a human being. And so even though I've shared this picture, I also want to be cautious about that. But I imagine that in the Easter festival, we have an opportunity to recognize behind the mystery of what's occurring with the Christ being rests this feminine, waiting for us to recognize her role in that mystery. And it is up to us to awaken that. So to come now back to this time of year where we are, today's the 26th of September. So we're coming toward the harvest moon. Harvest moon is the full moon that's closest to autumn equinox. So sometimes, usually it's happening in September, but it can also happen after equinox, and it can happen in October, as it will this year. So the harvest moon is the full moon closest to the equinox, and when it's happening in October, the sun has already stepped below the celestial equator, so that moon has a certain quality of being dominant. So we're already in the darkening time of the year, and now we have this moon coming full. And that moon this year I'm going to speak of it in the tropical zodiac. It will be full at 8 degrees of Aries. So the sun will be standing at 8 degrees of Libra, and the full moon opposite at 8 degrees of Aries. When we get to Holy Week next year, in 2021, so in the week preceding Easter, we find the date for Easter by looking for the first full moon that happens after the spring equinox. That moon will happen on March 28th in 2021. It happens to be a Sunday, Palm Sunday. We will have an entire week before then we get to Easter Sunday. But that full moon is going to happen at 8 degrees of Libra. So exactly opposite the configuration that we will have with harvest moon this year. So harvest moon will be in Aries with sun in Libra, and at Easter next year, the vernal full moon will be in Libra and the sun will be in Aries. So this is an interesting gesture. Doesn't always happen this way, because if the harvest moon is occurring before equinox, that's not going to be opposite the vernal full moon in the coming year. So I think this is important, because the relationship between sun and moon and earth is what helps us find that feast, and to really pay attention what's going on in my own life personally, what's happening in the world, what do I bring to harvest out of 2020 that is in addition to what's being brought in from the fields. What am I bringing from my life and from my life experience now into this harvest time that is somehow going to inform the position of the sun next year when the moon witnesses its return at that vernal full moon. Now, I'm going to share, I'm not going to tell this fairy tale, but just point out the title of it. It comes from the Northern European tradition, and it's the tale East of the Sun, West of the Moon. And I, once upon a time, asked myself the question, why would you describe it that way? What is east of the sun, west of the moon? So this is a fairy tale about the castle that lies east of the sun and west of the moon. And it led me on a journey that I'm going to very much abbreviate right now to get to my point, which is that when the moon is full, then it's opposite the sun in the horizon. All right? So if the sun is setting in the west, am I pointing west? West. The sun is setting, then the full moon will be rising in the east. And at that moment, between sunset in the west and moonrise in the east, the earth becomes the place that is east of the sun and west of the moon. So you could say that this happens every month. But for me, that wasn't enough. Like, okay, so that's interesting, but what else is in there? So once each year, the sun and the moon will do something really phenomenal, which is they'll change places in the celestial hemisphere, where actually this happens twice each year, but happens once each year when the sun is going north. So remember, the sun comes to the celestial equator, it will be rising up due east and it heads north, and then the full moon will be opposite, so that means it's below the celestial equator. Okay, so bear with me. This is hard to describe without showing an image. We got the horizon line, all right? So this will be my east, and this elbow is my west. Everybody good with me? Mm-hmm. Forget the space we're in. Okay, so it's spring. This is, okay, I don't have 4 arms, so I'm just gonna say, here's the celestial equator. This, my left arm is the celestial equator, because where we're standing on the earth, we're not parallel to the equator. We're slightly tipped toward it, or tipped this way, right? So here's the horizon, and here's the equator. All right, so the sun has already returned north of the celestial equator, but then it begins to set. So in the macrocosm, it's above. In the microcosm, in my horizon, it's going below the horizon. So it's at that moment both above and below. The moon, because it's full, is below the celestial equator, but coming above the horizon. So are you with me? Are you with me, everybody there? Mm-hmm. All right. So at this moment of the vernal full moon, the sun has returned north of the celestial equator. That's not the signal for Easter. You have to wait till the full moon comes. As soon as that full moon comes, because it's now stepped below the celestial equator, below the feet of the Virgin, at that moment, then the earth becomes the castle that is east of the sun and west of the moon. And in mystery wisdom, entering the castle means that you know you are about to go through an initiation. So I would argue that every year, when the sun comes above the celestial equator and that moon comes full, the earth regains the center of the cosmos, because a spiritual mystery took place on the earth that is central to the attention of all of the beings that live in the celestial spiritual world. And they look toward the earth to see how this mystery is realized by those who live in that time-space dimension, which is the human being. And so we become central to the attention of a living cosmos at that moment of sunset and full moon rise in the spring. And in 2021, and I would say that not only just at that moment, but until the Easter sun rises, we are in that central place. So rather than the center being a point in space, it's actually something we experience in time. There's a time when we come to the center. We could say the earth is at the center and two things can't occupy the center at the same moment, but there's a time when we become central to the attention of a living cosmos. And that timing is from full moon rise in the spring until Easter sunrise. And in 2021, that time for us to be at the center will last an entire week. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes that vernal full moon happens on Saturday, and we've only got a few hours before the Easter sun rises. Sometimes it comes on Thursday, we've got a couple of days. But this year, 2021, it will be happening on Palm Sunday. We have an entire week to move through the castle. It took Christian Rosenkreutz a week to go through the chemical wedding. It took Dante a week to go through the Inferno, the Purgatory, and the Paradise. This week of opportunity between that full moon and the Easter sunrise is a mighty and awesome mystery. And Harvest Moon, that's coming on October 1st, is like setting it up because it's standing in the place where the sun is going to be in the spring, and the sun is going to be in the place where the moon will be when that door to the castle opens. So it's worth knowing about. Okay. I need to take a breath and I need to take a drink of water.
What?
We are.
Just so that you on the screen know that I have this little sign here that I raise up for those who are here live to clap at the right moment. You'll notice I didn't even raise it. So they clapped up on their own.
If it was turned on, then we'd be showing up.
I didn't hear that, but I'm going to let those managing tech behind the scenes to deal with that. All right. Space and time. Okay, so this is where I started, right? So you can go ahead because I have my, oh, this is news about something that happened here earlier today. So, okay, I started with space and time. And when we look into the celestial world, we find that space is defined by things that come in 12s. So Jupiter is related to space. Jupiter has a cycle that takes it 12 years to go around the sun. And in ancient cultures, they weren't measuring the distances of things, and they didn't have telescopes to see, you know, the details of things. But in looking at the rhythm of things through space, they were able to articulate ideas about the relationship between the planets or the wandering stars and Earth. And so Jupiter only takes 12 years to move around in its cycle. If you mark where it is at the beginning and you watch how long will it take for it to come back there, 12 years. But then there's another planet that's moving a lot slower, more than twice as slow. And this is the furthest planet from us that we can see with our own eyes, so no telescope. And that's the planet Saturn. It takes Saturn 28 years to go around the sun. So Saturn was always regarded as Father Time. So with Saturn, we're dealing with time, and with Jupiter, we're dealing with space. And every 20 years, these two come together in the zodiac. Jupiter will catch up with Saturn, but it takes 20 years for that to happen. And so that last happened in May of 2000. When they came closest, they were beyond the sun, so we really didn't get a good look of it. So in 2000 it happened, but we didn't really get to see it. It's coming around again at winter solstice 2020. So this is something that's coming toward us. And if we just have this imagination that Saturn is carrying the experience of time or cosmic memory, and Jupiter is giving it boundary and definition within space, it's as though this space-time meeting is the mark of something new that wants to take place. And it's coming right at the moment, not exactly at the moment, but right at the date of the winter solstice. So if we think of the cycle of the year as a breathing process, that we breathe out with the earth at the summer solstice, everything on the earth is growing up toward the sun. It's at its highest place in the northern hemisphere. And then the blossoms are fructified and the fruit begins to form and ripen and fall toward the earth. This is our coming toward the in-breath, and we complete this in-breath with the earth at winter solstice. So there's this pause. If we all take a breath and just breathe in and out naturally, you notice there's a pause between each breath. That pause is the solstice moment. So full in-breath at winter solstice, and Saturn and Jupiter will meet. So I imagine that it's like a door opening in the space-time. Something new wants to come. Something has been rumbling all year that wants to be realized. And it's not so much looking for a causal effect in the stars, but recognizing that as human beings in time and space, we can harmonize our activity with those celestial gestures. So we have this opportunity, I think, not only to consider the position of the harvest moon and it kind of as a call toward Easter 2021, but also to recognize the import and the significance of the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter that's coming at winter solstice. The timing of these things is really, I'll just say, unprecedented. And this coming together of Saturn and Jupiter will be more visible to us than the one that happened 20 years ago. And according to the researches of the folks at Michigan State University, this great conjunction will actually find Saturn and Jupiter closer to one another than they have been since the 1600s, since the time of Galileo, since the first human being first used a telescope to look into the sky. So it's been 400 years since they have been this close. So I think these are some of the things that we've been feeling in this time. All right, so another big thought. And now I'm going to try to share my screen with the folks that are online, which means the folks in the room are not going to see that, but I'm going to bodily describe it for you. All right, so just to reiterate, you're not missing anything yet, anybody in the room. Harvest moon is going to happen on October 1st. It's going to be opposite the vernal full moon that will come on March 28th in 2021. That vernal full moon will occur on Palm Sunday, which is the beginning of the Holy Week. So we enter the castle that is east of the sun and west of the moon. We've got a week in there before the Easter sun rises. Like, this should really inform our festival celebration. When you read The Chemical Wedding, when you read Dante's Divine Comedy, I mean, it's intense experience, but we have these pieces of literature that we can use to inform our own festival celebration, but also just to think with the planetary gestures or with the Eightfold Path. I mean, there's so many ways to take this as an informing of the festival. And then what I didn't mention earlier, but is on this slide, Lent will begin on February 17th, so that's 40 days before Palm Sunday. At that time, the planets Saturn and Uranus will be square to one another. So this is very much going to inform the mood of 2021. 2020 has really been about the conjunction, the meeting between Jupiter and Pluto has been going on. I'm not going to get into that very much, but maybe later there will be opportunity to talk about now what will Saturn and Uranus bring. But the Lenten season will begin with their first of 3 squares. So Saturn is structure and Uranus is really about breaking things down. It's the first planet discovered with the use of a telescope. So it's about technology and how do we engage with that. So I'm just going to put that on the shelf. We'll come back to that another time. But so just so that everybody on the screen knows why it says that and telling everybody in the room that that's on the screen and you didn't get to see it. Okay. So Lent begins with the Saturn-Uranus square. Holy Week begins with the vernal full moon on Palm Sunday. That vernal full moon is exactly opposite Harvest Moon 2020, which is going to happen on October 1st. And just to squeeze one other little thing in there, because there are 31 days in October, There are not 31 days in a moon cycle. And we're having a full moon at the beginning of the month. It means we're going to have a second full moon, which is a blue moon. So the second full moon will actually come on Saturday, October 31st, All Hallowed Eve, blue moon. So that's some fun to look forward to. All right. Okay, I'm really going to beg your indulgence here because trying to manage the space and remember what I have on the slides is asking a lot of me right now. So I'm going to press a little button and hope I remember why I did what I did. Okay, so in the foundation stone meditation that Rudolf Steiner gave at the Christmas conference, 1923 to 1924, there are 5 panels. The first 3 include a call to the human soul. The first call, human soul, thou livest in the limbs. The second call, human soul, thou livest in the beat of heart and lung. The third call, human being, thou livest in the resting head. So this is the setup. And there's a lot that's happening in there, but in each one of those panels, remembering that it ends with this sense that the elemental spirits hear it in the east, in the west, in the north, in the south. We are beings, spiritual beings, living in the element of time and space. So this is resounding through the rhythm of this meditation. So these 3 calls are articulated, you could say, in a particular direction. The first call resounds from the heights to the depths. Okay? The second call resounds in the encircling round. So this is going, oh, let's tap it one more time, around. And then the third call is from the depths to the heights. So we have this from the heights to the depths in the encircling round, and then from the depths to the heights. So you end up with this triangular looking form. So I'm going to pause right here and digress for a moment and explain to you how I arrived at what I'm about to say. I was driving and I was asking Rudolf Steiner, why is the foundation stone itself a dodecahedron? And how is it related to the meditation? Because they must be related, they're called the same thing. So just very naive questioning, but really wondering, does the form of the stone itself have anything to do with the form of the meditation? And what rose up in me is that, because I had been looking at this for a while, a dodecahedron is a regular dodecahedron is a 12-sided object, and each one of the 12 sides is a flat surface that has the shape of a pentagon, a 5-sided form. And there are 12 of them in a dodecahedron. And then I realized that the foundation stone meditation has this rhythm of 5. And why this was so important to me was because I had continually heard about the foundation stone meditation as though it occurred in 4 panels, where the last 2 get squashed together as one. But something really significant happens in the very last panel. So just to complete the image for what everybody's looking at on the screen, when you take this one line from the heights to the depths and one line across in the encircling round, and then one from the depths back to the heights, you can connect this and you get a 5-pointed star. All right, so what happens is, okay, now the people on screen are looking at Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, after Vitruvius, right? And also the description that comes to us that the etheric life or vital body of the human being weaves in this form that is connected to the planet Venus. But now what they're seeing is a 5-pointed star drawn that way and a dodecahedron. But what you realize when you look at the foundation stone meditation is that the first 3 calls to the human soul, it's human soul, thou livest in the limbs. Human soul, thou livest in the beat of heart and lung. Human soul, thou livest in the resting head. 4th panel, at the turning point of time. So now this is placed in time. So you could say there are 3 post-Atlantean epochs until the 4th epoch when the Christ being incarnates. And in the 5th epoch, the human being speaks. And in the 5th panel of the Foundation Stone meditation, the human being speaks for the very first time. The 3 calls to the human soul are coming from the spiritual world. And then that's placed in time, and now the human being responds, O light divine, O Son of Christ, warm thou our hearts, enlighten thou our heads, that good may become what from our hearts we would found, from our heads direct with single purpose. This is what the human being responds, and this completes the pentagon that informs the dodecahedron, which is the foundation. There's a double dodecahedron, the foundation for the first Gertianum, the house of the word, and for all of those who would align themselves to this stream of anthroposophy into whose hearts have been laid this meditation as a foundation. So it's really important, I think, to think about it in 5 panels, to really get that sense that the human being speaks at the end in the 5th panel. So this is just on the screen. I have a slide that's sharing that. But now to get to this card. All right. So if we look at the festival cycle in the course of the year, we can very easily pick up a rhythm that is harmonious with a human rhythm. And I look for these things in 9-month cycles, because it takes 9 months from conception through gestation to birth of a human being. So when we look in the animal kingdom, it's operating at a much different rhythm. In the plant kingdom, a different rhythm going on. But in a human kingdom, 9 months from conception through gestation to birth. So if you look at the festival cycle in 9-month rhythms, what happens is it takes about 3 years to go from 9 months from the beginning to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, and back to the beginning. So if we were to say, okay, just because we want to research, let's take the moment that Saturn and Jupiter are coming together at winter solstice as our starting point. Because Saturn is time, Jupiter is space, and they're coming together. A portal is opening in the space-time continuum, and I can step into that. And that's my starting point. So on this card that you're seeing on the screen, that I have plenty of these, if anybody wants one, contact me. You start there. And then you lay the foundation stone meditation into it. And you say, okay, that's going to be at the top. This is a call from the heights to the depths. And that's going to take me 9 months. So from winter solstice 2020, 9 months later, I'm going to end up at autumn equinox and the time of the festival of the Archangel Michael. 9 months from there, I'm going to end up at the feast of St. John. 9 months later, I end up at the feast of the Annunciation. 9 months after that, I'm back at Christmas time, and it will be Christmas 2023. So we will be at the 100th anniversary of the Christmas conference. If we start with the winter solstice, great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter this year, the season of the Holy Nights 2020, and we move through the festival cycle in this way, and you can do it as a pentagram. You can paint it. You have to clap. You can paint it in many colors. You can draw it, you can imagine it, you can live with it. I created it on a card as just a way to give a form to our moving toward that really auspicious time when we're going to be celebrating the 100th anniversary of the foundation stone being given as a meditation at the Christmas conference, in part motivated by this quote from Rudolf Steiner. This should be our ideal, to create forms that are expressions of the inner life. To give forms that are expressions of the inner life. So this pentagram is connected to the etheric life body of the human being. And so to try to engage with it artistically and through the festival cycle and through this period of time that we have that's going to be inaugurated a certain way by the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. And just to add a little cherry on top, Michaelmas 2023. So this will be 100 years from 1923. The harvest moon will happen on September 29th. So there's really this lovely gesture of bringing something to harvest. Now, I'm just, again, going to digress for a moment and just share my own personal experience. The very first time I ever gave a talk to the anthroposophical community was in September of 1999, Rudolf Steiner House in Ann Arbor, because I had run into Andre Naylor at Whole Foods when it used to be where Trader Joe's is now, and said, Andre, there's this thing happening in the sky and I'm so excited about it, and assuming that all the anthroposophists already know this. So I'm thinking, you know, we're in the bread aisle and we could talk about this. And she looked at me and said, Mary, with her beautiful accent, I can tell that you're telling me something really important, but I don't understand you. Would you be willing to come to our Michaelmas festival and share that? And I said, yes, I will. I was so excited. And then I went home and I thought, what am I thinking? Okay, so what I was seeing is that at Michaelmas 1999, so the last Michaelmas of the 20th century, the node of the moon was at 11 degrees of Leo. So the node is this point in space that's described by the intersection of two planes, the moon's orbital plane and the Earth's orbital plane. They intersect at two places, and this matters because as a soul spirit being incarnating from a star, you got to bring your stuff with you, and you bring it through the portal of the node. So the south node is what you brought with you, you could say, really just for the sake of making a picture. And the north node is, okay, and this is what I'm going to do with everything I brought with me. All right, so the north node of the moon is standing at 11 degrees of Leo on September 29th, 1999, last Michaelmas of the 20th century. The north node of the moon was at 11 degrees of Leo in 1925 when Rudolf Steiner died. So the node also is significant at the moment of death because this is the portal through which you carry the fruits of the life that you have just led. So you could say that when the node goes over that spot, there's a sounding forth of the deeds of this individual on the earth. And here it was, the last Michaelmas of the 20th century, at least for me. I only knew about Michaelmas because of Rudolf Steiner. And I thought this was so awesome that we needed really to look at that kind of cosmic harmony. And it's happening again on the 100th anniversary where we've got the harvest moon happening at the Feast of Michael. And you could say, oh, so big deal. But like, this is something. There's something in this. And so just to complete the story, I went home and really started to fret. And I was really worried that that maybe I had made a mistake and maybe this wasn't such a big thing. And so I can't even say I prayed, I begged, please see me through this, because you go into the Steiner house in Ann Arbor, there's a portrait of Rudolf Steiner right there at your back when you're talking. And he's got a lovely countenance, but is a little intimidating. And so when it came my turn to speak, I asked if I could just turn my chair around. I couldn't stand up, I couldn't. But what happened is, out of my pleading that I not be misleading, that I was seeing this gesture and that I thought it was really important, I received a message. And this message came the following morning as I was waking up. Now, I'm going to digress for a moment and share that last night I watched the Front Range Anthroposophical Cafe presentation by Leland Harris. And he was talking about our relationship with the Archangel Michael, and he described it in 4 stages, where there's allegiance, alignment, relationship, and partnership. And one of the things that he explained that I had not heard before was his experience that when one aligns to a particular spiritual path, that what happens is, in the moment of making that commitment, that things can become more clear, and that this is actually the work of the being of Michael, who's the bearer and the keeper of the cosmic intelligence. And that when we commit ourselves to a spiritual path, it's as though the veil lifts and we can see something. We can see our destiny in a certain respect. So I didn't know that this was happening in 1999, but in listening to him last night and preparing for tonight, it came to mind what had happened. So I had been pleading that I did not want to go to Ann Arbor and provide information that was going to mislead anybody and that was going to be insignificant. I wanted it to matter. And so when I woke up the next morning, I received a message that in my mind's eye appears as though a golden light kind of streaming beside my bed, and something being spoken over and over again until I would understand what it meant, which was, after the betrayal, there were but 11. After the betrayal, there were but 11. So remember, the node was at 11 degrees. And so this was the mystery of 11, that it is a prerequisite to community, wherein a 12 has already been achieved, but something occurs. And in the mystery of Golgotha, it's the betrayal by Judas of the Christ being. And that there are only 11 that then go through the experience of the crucifixion, the resurrection, the 40 days of teaching, and the ascension. And these 11 are they who have to find it in themselves that we are the community. And so this was really much more than I thought I was going to talk about. I was just going to say, hey, the node is in the same spot, and isn't that an interesting synchronicity? But now I have the imagination that perhaps in agreeing to step into that arena and share information about this mystery, that was an engagement with the Archangel Michael, who could then give me the next piece of the puzzle to kind of carry me through that really intimidating moment. But I also think that at this time, we have an opportunity to recognize ourselves as members of a community that has the substance that is needed now more than ever, and to be able to speak about these mysteries in a way that has integrity with regard to it, and integrity with regard to the human being that would hear that. And to also know that when we stand as a witness to harmony in cosmic gestures, that we don't belittle it and say, well, it's just a coincidence, that there's actually something sounding out in that. And because I'm at the home of Mary Lynn Channer, I'm going to share a picture as a close, as my closing, from Hazel Straker. When I experienced her first lecture, she shared with us that the deeds of the Christ being on the earth were, each of them occurred in harmony with the celestial gesture. And that it was as though this being was creating a mighty cosmic lyre around the earth. And that every time one of these gestures recurred, a note was sounded on that cosmic lyre for us to hear. May human beings hear it. So what I'm asking us to hear in the harmony of what's happening right now, that harvest moon in this really awesome year is going to precede the Palm Sunday sun, standing opposite the vernal moon. And we have an entire week to stand at the center and to know that it's an initiation process. That's not easy, but that we have the substance. And through aligning ourselves with the Michaelic will, we have the will and the capacity. Okay. So I'm going to stop share. You can clap if you want. You're back here going like this. So I want to thank everybody that showed up online and everybody here. And again, Burley and Mary Lynn, it really means a lot to me to be in your home and to celebrate this festival together, that we were able to join our voices. That's something I have really missed. Our not being able to be together physically. I've been prone to trying to lead people in song because we can join our voices when we can't come together. So we got to sing today and be together. Yeah. So Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everybody, for being here online, and thank you, everybody, for being in the room. Okay.